Dear beloved community, it's so wonderful to be together with everyone again. I hope everybody's had a wonderful and nourishing month. As we sit together this evening, the rain's falling quite heavily here in Mountain Spring. And it's such a wonderful experience to have the sound of the rain and the beautiful autumn leaves outside. We're really experiencing the changing of the seasons, and as I shared, it's such a beautiful moment. So much has happened during the past month. We've had a wonderful retreat not far from Mountain Spring, and the first ever lamp transmission that's ever been held on Australian soil in the Plum Village tradition was held. And of course, one of our members of the Compassionate Ocean Sangha received the lamp, and it was such a beautiful experience to be able to be a part of that together with all of the other brothers and sisters and practitioners. And now we find ourselves together again, continuing on with our journey through the Lotus Sutra. As I was contemplating the third chapter of the Lotus Sutra, I was reflecting back to a movie that the Sangha watched many years ago. Now it was called Finding Nemo. I think everybody's probably seen this movie. And in that movie, there's the lovely scene where Nemo is swimming off to a far off destination, and a friend, another fish friend, offers a song. And that song is Just Keep Swimming, Swimming, Swimming. And for me, this is a key point for us to realize as practitioners. We just keep swimming. We're not swimming in the sense of swimming only to a far off destination, but in the sense of the swimming itself being the reward, being the fruit. To be able to do this, to be able to have the willingness to show up for each moment just as it is and not to give up or not to give in is bodhicitta. In the seminal text by Shantideva that I've spoken about a lot, the way of the bodhisattva, the bodhicharyavatara, the mind of love, bodhicitta, is described as being like a flash of lightning that illuminates all that's there in the dark of night. Bodhicitta, the mind of love, this softness of the heart, helps us to see things clearly, to see things in a wider sense than we normally experience them. Like a flash of lightning, the mind of love, this softening of the heart, illuminates the world outside and also the world inside. In the commentaries, bodhicitta is described as having two aspects: bodhicitta as intention and bodhicitta as action. Bodhicitta as intention is the wish to benefit ourselves and others. It's like an aspiration. Perhaps we could describe it as an intention to set out on a journey. And this is already a wonderful thing, to have that intention, the firm intention to live and to think and to speak in such a way that benefits ourselves and the world around. This is wonderful. It's something we should celebrate. And then the second aspect of bodhicitta is bodhicitta in action, bodhicitta as action. And this is, to use the example that we were just using, if we have the intention of setting out on a journey, then bodhicitta as action is actually beginning and taking steps on that journey. It's actually opening the door and beginning that journey. Just between you and me, I think many of us are exceptionally good at the first aspect of bodhicitta, bodhicitta as intention. But often we can experience greater challenges with transforming intention into action. I wonder why you think that is. To return to the metaphor that we've spoken about many times, the metaphor of building a raft to cross over to the other shore. The Pali Canon describes 6 practices, 6 ways of crossing over called the paramitas. There's generosity, there's ethics or the mindfulness trainings, inclusiveness, energy, meditation, and insight. These are the pieces of wood with which we can build our vessel to cross over the flood. And as I reflect on these 6 crossings over, I'm struck again and again by the fact that they all help us. When I reflect on them deeply, I feel that in some way they all help us to reach out of our isolation and connect with others. And to me, this is perhaps one of the greatest crossings over of our time. The big delusion that we suffer that we're somehow separate, that we're isolated individuals without a connection to others or the world around us. To me, it seems that we've never been more connected through technological means than we are right now. But many of us still feel very isolated and alone. These 6 paramitas are the very journey itself. They're the timbers of our raft and the way to cross the stream of suffering. They are, in a sense, the manifestation of bodhicitta as intention in terms of generating aspiration. And they're also bodhicitta as action because they're practices to apply in our daily life. In Mahayana Buddhism, in Great Vehicle Buddhism, those of us who've generated this seed of bodhicitta, the mind of love, this softness of the heart, and are practicing the crossings over of the paramitas are called bodhisattvas. A bodhisattva is also someone who's made the great vow. And this is, of course, not a vow to win the lotto or to go to Hawaii, but it's nothing against Hawaii. But this is the great vow, the vow to be of benefit to all living beings and to ourselves, wherever we might find ourselves, in whatever circumstance. Traditionally, in Mahayana Buddhism, there are 4 great archetypal bodhisattvas, archetypal energies, 4 great qualities that we want to cultivate in our own practice of awakening and manifesting bodhicitta as intention. The first of these bodhisattvas is Manjushri, the bodhisattva of great understanding, who in the iconography carries a sword of wisdom to cut through delusion and to cut through this, the patterns of wrong thinking that we carry. And our teacher Tay once shared with us that the Buddha said that all perceptions are wrong. And then Tay himself shared that Tay wanted to have a little bit of compassion. So he shared that 99% of the things that we think, the things that we perceive are wrong. So 1% might be correct. So in some way, the sword of Manjushri to me also symbolizes an energy, a capacity that I feel is an important capacity, an important energy in terms of the spiritual practice. And that's the capacity or the energy of discernment. It's so easy to believe our own storylines, to believe our own perceptions. And as a practitioner, this is one of the most challenging things for us. We get caught in the confirmation bias kind of way of thinking. As a practitioner, it's always important to have that capacity to be able to reflect on, as Tay has invited us to reflect on, am I really sure that the way I'm experiencing things, what I'm perceiving is really the full reality? And if we're actually understanding the Buddha's teaching clearly, then the answer is always no. I always have more to learn. I always have more to understand. There's something that I'm missing here. So we're not so sure that the knowledge we have is complete. We're always open to discover more. The second of the 4 great archetypal bodhisattvas in the Mahayana tradition is Samantabhadra. And this is the bodhisattva that is called the bodhisattva of great action. Samantabhadra can be translated in a few different ways, like universal worthy bodhisattva, universal goodness, that goodness is contained in everything, like bodhisattva, or the bodhisattva of great action. I guess you could say that the practice of the bodhisattva Samantabhadra is the practice of manifesting wisdom through action. The energy of Samantabhadra helps us to move from the realm of wisdom as intention into the realm of wisdom as daily action. We begin to release the idea that we might do such and such a thing later when conditions will be miraculously favorable. And we begin to realize that this moment right now is the perfect moment to open our heart, the perfect moment to be of service, the perfect moment to show up with all of ourselves. Most of the time in our life, the hard reality is that we can't necessarily choose the circumstances that we find ourselves in. But to me, one of the teachings of the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra is that we can choose how to respond. We can choose to allow that moment to be a moment of waking up, of opening our heart, of opening our mind. The third great bodhisattva is Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of great compassion, or the bodhisattva of deep listening. This name Avalokiteshvara means the person who hears the cries of the world, the cries of all sentient beings in the world out there, but also the cries of the world within our own mind, within our own heart. The cries of the world out there are not separate from the cries within our own being, within our own heart. Developing the capacity to be present with what's there, to hear what's being shared, and also what's not yet able to be shared. I often share with my friends, and it's particularly present for me this evening as the rain is falling, that to meditate is to learn how to listen with all of our being, to be completely open, and to listen with our ears first of all, and then learning to listen with our eyes, with our mind, and with our whole being. Just opening that space of availability to what's there. This is the practice of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And the fourth great Bodhisattva is Ksitigarbha, the earth store Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of the great vow. Ksitigarbha is sometimes described as the greatest of all the Bodhisattvas because he or she made the vow to enter hell, to enter the darkest places, the places of despair, and to be present with beings that are suffering greatly. He or she made the vow that they'll always remain in the darkest places until all living beings have transformed their suffering. This paradoxical vow, living beings are limitless, so I vow to rescue all of them. I vow to be present with them all, is the vow of the Bodhisattva of great aspiration, of great vow, Ksitigarbha. So the fourth quality here is the quality of determination, of non-fear, directed toward our own suffering and the suffering of others. Whenever I think of the Bodhisattva Ksitigarbha, I remember when I was a young practitioner, I seemed to have some affinity with this Bodhisattva or this energy for various reasons. People were gifting me copies of the Sutra of the Past Vows of Ksitigarbha, of Earth Store Bodhisattva, and so on. So I was very influenced by this Bodhisattva. And in the Chinese tradition where I was practicing, every year there would be the anniversary day of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, and there would be the chanting of the Sutra of the Past Vows of Bodhisattva Ksitigarbha, and reciting the name of Ksitigarbha, like to celebrate the accomplishments of this Bodhisattva. And at the time, I was working quite long hours. I was working as an apprentice chef, and I would lose track of the days and the weeks, sometimes the months, because at that time, sometimes I would work 10 days straight or back-to-back shifts, and would be all over the place, and I wouldn't really have a regular schedule. But often, and so whenever I would have free time, I would go to the temple, I would go to the monastery. And so there would be sometimes great distances between my visits to the temple, between my visits to the monastery. And yet, without fail, for the few years that I was practicing in the Chinese tradition, I would always somehow show up right in the middle of the Earth Store Bodhisattva Memorial Day. So I had that kind of affinity. And when I came to Plum Village, I remember writing my letter of aspiration to become a novice monk. Now, I don't remember exactly everything that I wrote now, more than a quarter of a century later, but I remember that there was some part of that letter that I wrote something quite similar to how I'd just been sharing about the aspiration of the Bodhisattva Ksitigarbha. I wrote something along the lines of, I want to become a novice monk because I like to serve all living beings, and I will do my best to enter the darkest places and to bring hope to the darkest places. I would love to be able to read that letter again. That very young person who wrote that letter with so much aspiration, even then. So I don't know if I've been able to accomplish any of those aspirations, but I remember having that kind of spirit back then when I was young. It hasn't gone anywhere, but maybe it manifests in a slightly different way these days. I find it interesting that in the iconography, Ksitigarbha, this bodhisattva of great aspiration, is often depicted as holding a wish-fulfilling jewel in his hand, a chintamani. It's chintamani in Sanskrit means the wish-fulfilling jewel, or the as-you-wish jewel. This jewel is in the iconography is always incredibly radiant, and it's said to illuminate the darkest places. And in the text that I mentioned earlier, The Way of the Bodhisattva, bodhicitta itself is described as being a wish-fulfilling jewel, a jewel that helps us to manifest peace, to manifest stability, to manifest compassion for ourselves and for those around us. Right understanding, beneficial action, great compassion, and the deep aspiration to be present for living beings, for that which has come to be. These are the fundamental mind and heart qualities of the Mahayana path. They're the qualities of bodhicitta in intention, as well as being the manifestation of bodhicitta in action. We might wonder, what does bodhicitta look like? These four qualities of understanding, of acting to benefit ourselves and others, of generating and offering compassion to ourselves and to others, as well as the aspiration, the deep vow to always be there, to embrace and to understand and to transform that which has come to be. Sometimes we often hear that vow, I'm there to rescue all living beings, sarva bhava in Sanskrit. Bhava can also mean that which has come to be, not only a living being in the terms of like an animal or a plant or a human being, but that which has come to be can be a perception, can be a feeling, be a part of ourselves. So I'm always going to be present by the side of those in need, to be present for that which has come to be. That's bodhicitta in action. So these are the four essential qualities of the Mahayana path. These are the hallmarks of the archetypal energies, if you like, of the great vehicle path. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. It's been a little while, a couple of months since we spent time together on our Lotus Sutra journey. And after the depth and the breadth of chapter 2, which some practitioners spend a lifetime to explore, we find ourselves arriving at chapter 3 of the Lotus Sutra. There are a few aspects to this chapter. One thing that I'd like to mention is that in this chapter, the Buddha offers his senior disciple Shariputra a prediction of Buddhahood. And this is a very important moment. In fact, there aren't really any other moments in the Lotus Sutra other than moments that are important. Even the seemingly throwaway moments in this wonderful sutra that is like an opera in a way. Each of the moments in this amazing sutra are important, and they're there for a reason. So this moment is one of many important moments. Shariputra, as one of the Buddha's most senior disciples, plays a number of roles throughout the sutras, not only in the Lotus Sutra, but also in other texts, whether in the Mahayana Sutras or also in the Pali Canon. One of the roles that Shariputra plays is being the foremost in wisdom, the person with the deepest wisdom. And even in the Pali Canon, we find often the certain disciples are being described as being the foremost in wisdom, or the foremost in compassion, or the foremost in meditative accomplishments, or so on. Shariputra is said to have been the foremost in wisdom, able to penetrate to the heart of a situation, the heart of a teaching. And so it's in this role that we find Shariputra being the one that in the Mahayana teachings, that the Buddha addresses the Prajnaparamita teachings, such as the Heart Sutra and so on too. Also in some of the early Mahayana texts, Shariputra is, in addition to being presented as the personification of being the foremost in wisdom, he's also presented as kind of an emblem, or I guess another personification of kind of the institution, the old guard, or the traditionalists. We see this tendency in its full in some texts such as the Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra, which actually might be fun to explore later. Sometimes I like to joke that our meditation hall here in Mountain Spring is like the hut in Vimalakirti's, in the Vimalakirti Sutra, like Vimalakirti's hut. Vimalakirti's hut is said to be a very small hut, but somehow, even though it's a very small hut, it's able to contain a multitude of people. And it's a bit like our meditation hall in Mountain Spring. It's quite surprising how many people we can fit in this meditation hall. And then in some cases, Shariputra also represents us. It's kind of an interlocutor in the text, and he represents us. In the Lotus Sutra, the fact that Shariputra is offered a prediction of enlightenment encompasses these aspects that I've just spoken about. But to me, it's also a reminder of one of the central teachings of the Lotus, and that is that every living being will become a Buddha, and in some way is already. That just like the ocean only has one flavor, the flavor of salt, so too this path only has one taste, the taste of liberation, the taste of Buddhahood. But an additional aspect is that in offering Shariputra a prediction of enlightenment, there's the spirit of reconciliation. In sutras such as the Vimalakirti Sutra, the framework is such that anyone representing the old guard, the traditionalist, is seen as very narrow and incapable of understanding things deeply. And with that background, we can see this moment in the Lotus Sutra as an olive branch. And that's one of the key spirits of the Lotus Sutra, the spirit of reconciliation, the spirit of the whole of the Buddha's teachings, regardless of how we receive them. And we receive them according to our capacity. All of the teachings of the Buddha have this same flavor and will have the same outcome. In addition to this prediction of enlightenment that we find in chapter 3, one of the central teachings of chapter 3 of the Lotus Sutra is the parable of the burning house. And this parable tells the story of a rich man who had many children, and they're playing inside his old and decaying house. The house catches fire, but the children are too absorbed in their games to notice. The father tries to persuade them to come out, but they refuse. They're too busy with their games. They're too busy with their jigsaw puzzles or whatever else they might be playing. And so then the father thinks about a kind of a trick to get them out of the house. He tells them that outside of the house, he's got 3 carts waiting for them. One cart is pulled by a sheep, one cart is pulled by a deer, and one cart is pulled by an ox. And the children are so excited, they're so delighted by this promise, and so they run out of the burning house. But when they come out of the burning house, they see that there aren't 3 carts at all. There's only one. There's only one cart. But that cart is covered in jewels and it's pulled by a white ox. And the father turns to the children and he explains to the children that he only said there were 3 carts in order to get them out of the burning house, but that this one cart is the very best, and that this cart can carry everyone to safety and bring them to happiness. He then invites all the children to get onto the cart and to ride in the cart. So we might think that in telling the children that there were 3 carts outside and when in fact there was only one, that when the Buddha did this, the Buddha was telling a lie. And how would that be possible? How would it be possible for the Buddha to tell a lie? In the view of the Lotus Sutra, it's not a falsehood at all. It's a skillful means. The Buddha knew that if he revealed the whole truth, it wouldn't be able to be accepted. It wouldn't be able to be embraced or put into practice. We can also have the idea that skillful means is a Mahayana invention. In fact, it exists already in the very early texts. For example, there's the story that after his awakening experience, the Buddha felt that he didn't actually want to teach. He felt that it'd be troublesome, it'd be a burden, and that people wouldn't understand anyway. Maybe we can ask our lay Dharma teachers to share whether this thought has ever come into their minds. I know, I have to say it has from time to time. But then the Buddha was reflecting and saw that some lotuses only grow tall enough to slightly break the surface of the pond. Some break the surface just a little. And then there's some lotuses that grow tall and strong. He recognized this as the sign of the different capacities of living beings, and that each one receives the teachings that they're ready for or are able to receive in a way. To continue on with the parable in chapter 3, the Buddha then explains that he's like the father in the parable, and that all living beings are like his children. The burning house represents the world of samsara, this world of dust, this world of repeated cycles of dissatisfaction, full of suffering and full of danger. And that these three carts represent the three vehicles of Buddhism: the Shravaka vehicle, the vehicle of the hearers; the Pracheka Buddha vehicle, which we've already spoken about as the vehicle of those who who come into contact through their own effort with the wisdom of the Dharma and wake up. They have an awakening experience. They may not have necessarily met a Buddha, but they've come into contact with or discovered these teachings themselves through their own efforts, and have awakened but are unable to teach or unwilling to teach. And then there's also the Bodhisattva vehicle. These are the three basic vehicles of the Buddhist tradition. So these are also different teachings in a way that the Buddha gave to different people according to their capacities and inclinations. Sometimes we call this in the Mahayana tradition the turnings of the wheel. The first turning, the second turning, the third turning, and so on. It doesn't mean that some vehicles are better than others. It's just like the lotuses. Some people can receive this aspect of a teaching. Some people can receive another aspect. If we give a Dharma talk, and then in the afternoon or the next day we have Dharma discussion, I've sometimes given a talk, and I'm sure other monastic brothers and sisters have, and definitely our lay Dharma teachers have, and we come to Dharma sharing, and then it's almost as if there are 20 people in the group, it's almost as if there have been 20 different Dharma talks that have been given, and sometimes I don't even recognize the things that people are sharing about that they heard, or they were touched by, or that they didn't agree with in the Dharma talk. And that's just as it is. Everybody has different capacities. Everybody has different tendencies, and we will receive, it's said sometimes that we receive the teachings or we meet the teacher that we're ready for. So these three vehicles the Buddha is teaching us in the Lotus Sutra are not the ultimate goal of Buddhism. The ultimate goal is the one vehicle of Buddhahood, which is represented by this great cart. Now, those of us who are listening to this talk, who are students of the texts, will probably expect from our studies of the text that in some circles, there's been a lot of debate about this parable as to whether the great cart, the Buddha vehicle, is a separate and new vehicle to the three other carts, that whether in fact there are four vehicles and not just three vehicles, or whether there's only one vehicle. And by implication, if there was a fourth kind of better vehicle, then the other vehicles would be inferior or useless. So, some people have come down on one side or another of this debate. But to me, if we understand that in addition to sharing that everyone has the nature to become fully awakened, and we also understand the spirit of reconciliation of the Lotus Sutra, this spirit of that each and every moment of our life is part of the Dharma body, the Dharmakaya. And then we also understand skillful means as a way of responding to people's different capacities. Then as we move through this text, we're going to discover the teaching in this text that each and every single thing is a part of our path. And so this issue becomes one of the many possible Byzantine, meandering, and somewhat meaningless side roads. Many years ago, I was having tea with Tay. It was in the winter retreat 2004 in Deer Park Monastery. It was the only time that all of the International Plum Village Monastic Sangha was together in one place for 3 months. It was a very beautiful retreat, and I was having tea with Tay, and Tay turned to me while we were having tea together and said, Brother Phappai, one of the deepest teachings in Mahayana Buddhism is that if we're deeply aware, there's nothing that's not the Buddha Dharma. So this is the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. This is the teaching also of sutras like the Avatamsaka Sutra. So the parable in chapter 3 teaches and shows us that the Buddha uses skillful means to demonstrate his teachings according to the needs and the abilities of his listeners, but that the true and the deepest intention of all the Buddha's teachings and all of the Buddha's actions and words is to awaken the inherent Buddhahood in each of us, that all of us have as our fundamental nature, the nature to become a Buddha, and that there's no difference between living beings in terms of both this capacity and also the ultimate destiny that we have. There's a lovely phrase in chapter 3 that strikes me, and it says, a true disciple of the Buddha who hears this teaching and is able to respond with, I joyfully accept, will always move forward on the path of liberation. I joyfully accept. The path of Buddhism is a path, first of all, of acknowledging to ourselves that we have the capacity to understand, and we have the capacity to transform our suffering. And this is a big one. This is very subtle, and some friends actually don't even get to this point of recognizing and acknowledging our capacity to understand our situation. So if we arrive at this moment, it's a very joyful moment, and far from being a somber path, the path of practice is a path of joy. I joyfully embrace this teaching. I joyfully embrace this path. I joyfully embrace this moment. I was speaking earlier a little about my time in the Chinese tradition, and my first precepts transmitting teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun, just passed away recently, not so long ago. And at the time I was practicing in the temple, I received a book from the Venerable Master, and the title of that book was Perfectly Willing. And I don't have a copy of this book anymore, but I remember some sections of that book. And he had a very varied and interesting life, and had met many challenges in building what later became the Fokangshan Buddhist order, the Buddha's Light Mountain Buddhist order. And in that book, he was sharing about his practice of no matter what difficulties he faced, he would practice this practice of saying, I am perfectly willing, whatever it is, I'm perfectly willing. I'm perfectly willing to show up. And this is not a sense of just kind of tolerating something, but joyful embrace of what's there. This is a very beautiful practice. It's not an easy practice, but I've personally found it a very joyful practice, a very wonderful practice of practicing to be perfectly willing to show up for whatever it can seem that life throws at us. Is this willingness of mind not to close off to any experience. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't have moments where we feel overwhelmed or we feel like, oh goodness, I can't even take another step. We're human beings after all. We feel these things, we feel exhausted, we feel like we want to give up. We have moments of depression, we have moments of anger. But this practice of being perfectly willing is when we experience those things, when we have moments of thinking like, why should I even bother? These kind of feelings and perceptions and thoughts, we have, as Tay has invited us, this energy of smiling to it, of saying, you know what, this is also going to pass. It's okay. I'm perfectly willing to show up for that feeling too. So I'm perfectly willing to show up for the situation that's bringing about that feeling, and I'm perfectly willing to show up for that feeling as well. And I'm perfectly willing to embrace this invitation of the Buddha to see that my fundamental nature is the nature of awakening. In Buddhism, we see the arising of joy quite differently than the usual tendency in modern society. Usually we think that joy arises when we get something. I don't know what it might be, the newest phone, and when we get this kind of special thing that we think we need, then we think joy will arise. But in fact, in Buddhism, joy arises from letting go. Cultivating joy is an important aspect of Buddhist practice, and it's an essential component, I believe, of spiritual development. According to Buddhist teachings, joy arises when we let go of our attachments and our desires, and we focus on the present moment. Tay has shared with us this core practice in a very simple way and a very direct way. You have enough. Now, earlier in this talk, we spoke about bodhisattvas. In Buddhism, a bodhisattva is seen as moving through 10 stages called the 10 grounds or lands or realms. And the first of these 10 stages is called the ground of joy. In Sanskrit, this is pramudita bhumi. This joy arises from seeing the nature of suffering, of seeing the nature of the way things are. And rather than getting all bummed out and depressed about it and heavy, we see that there's a way to transform this suffering. There's a way to understand this suffering. And not only that, but we have the capacity to do so. And from that, this sense of joy arises. This first stage is sometimes also described as being the stage or the path of seeing. Since we have a glimpse of things as they are. And when we have that glimpse of things as they are, something changes within us. There's a couple of nuances in the Sanskrit and in the Sanskrit pramudita, and I think they're important when we talk about joy. The first is that pra means everywhere. The monastic precepts, and I shared about this in our recent retreat, the monastic precepts are called the prati moksha. Moksha means liberation or freedom, and pra means everywhere. So it means freedom everywhere. This is the basic approach to ethics in Buddhism. We see ethics or mindfulness trainings as practices of becoming more free. The second part of the word pramudita is mudita. And this is translated very simply as joy, but it's actually a very specific kind of joy. There are a few words for joy in the Buddhist canon, in Buddhist language. There's piti, there's anumodana, and there's mudita. They're all very specific kinds of joy. And I feel like it's important to mention the kind of joy that's being spoken about in this very first stage, this first establishment of a bodhisattva. Mudita is one of the four limitless minds. It's a celebration of the good fortune, the accomplishments of others. Our usual tendency is to see ourselves or our experience as the point of reference. How does this or how will this affect me? This is a natural human tendency. And as we cultivate mudita, our focus shifts to celebrate the accomplishments and the joys of others without this constant tendency to focus on our small self. This also has the capacity to transform our deep-seated root of ill will. We have this beautiful song in the Plum Village tradition, whatever illuminates your path, I'll consider as my friend. This is the practice of mudita. This is the practice of the bodhisattva. So many of us get caught up in, and it can be very subtle, in the mindset of, oh, you know, all these people are enjoying this, they're going there, why can't I do that? Why can't I have this? Or all the people, they're so lucky, they have this, they have that, poor me, poor me. The practice of mudita is the practice of celebrating when we see the good fortune of others. We celebrate that rather than saying, oh, it's just not fair. What about me? Poor me. Why can't I have that? They all have this. I don't have that condition. We celebrate their good fortune. We celebrate their good luck. We do everything possible so that they're happy. This is a very beautiful quality. And this is the kind of joy that is the joy that arises as the very first manifestation of the fruit of the practice on the path of the bodhisattva. To me, this is also the practice of what we call in Zen the parental, the joyful, and the big mind, the three different minds, the three minds of Zen. In the parable that we've been exploring this month in chapter 3 of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha describes himself as a father, and we're like his children. This is the parental mind. There's a text by Zen Master Dogen that has been a great source of nourishment for me. It's called The Instructions to the Cook, the Tenzo Kyokan. I've actually offered retreats on this text before. It makes for a very lovely, a very delicious retreat. I love this pithy text for so many reasons. Perhaps one of those reasons is because in this text, Master Dogen uses food and cooking as a metaphor. And I come from a cooking background. It's very easy to read this text and to think that Master Dogen is just talking about how to wash and cook rice, how to prepare vegetables, and so on, and all the different roles in the monastery. And of course, this is true. But at the same time, on a completely different level, Dogen is talking about meditation practice and qualities of mind and heart that are conducive to and a product of an authentic spiritual life. In one section of the instructions to be given to the cook, Dogen reminds us that someone working for the benefit of others, in other words, a bodhisattva, should cultivate and maintain these three minds. The first is called the big mind, or magnanimous mind, in Vietnamese, Dai Tâm. The Second mind is the parental or nurturing, or perhaps the old mind, Lao Tam in Vietnamese, Lao Xin in Chinese, or and then the last of the three minds is joyful mind, or Hi Tam, Xi Xin, is the third mind in Chinese, joyful mind, Hi Tam. Magnanimous mind, big mind, or broad mind means, according to Zen Master Dogen, being unprejudiced and refusing to take sides. In other words, big mind is not being swayed by biases or preferences. Cooks, he says, are actually meditation practitioners who have cultivated this mind, this broad mind, this big mind. Work with the ingredients they have, not the ones they wish they had. We work with the ingredients of our life, the circumstances of our life as they are, and not the ones necessarily we wish we had. It's okay, it's good, it's wonderful to wish and to create conditions to have other conditions, but right now you have these conditions. You have this physical and external environment, you have this body, you have this mind, you have this particular constellation of suffering, this particular constellation of joy. You don't have my body. Consider that a blessing. You don't have my constellation of joy. You don't have my constellation of suffering or circumstances. You should also consider that a great good fortune for yourself. But the practice of broad mind here is to see all of those ingredients of our life as important and as useful and as wonderful. And we make a delicious dish. We make a delicious dish to serve the other practitioners in our Bodhimanda. A Bodhimanda is sometimes translated as a monastery, but Bodhimanda means the kind of our practice place, our place of practice. So wherever you are, that's your sacred place. So in your sacred place, you create a dish, a delicious dish of the ingredients of your life, whether they're superior ingredients. What's that fad that everybody has these days that I can't make any sense of? This fad of putting gold leaf on ice cream or pizza or whatever, and then calling it fancy. And I mean, it doesn't taste like anything, and it all comes out the same way. Anything. I've never really understood this, but it reflects on the human mind. You know, it is what it is. If you have a superior ingredient, maybe gold leaf, or maybe I hope it's not gold leaf, or maybe a nice heirloom tomato or something like that, something really special. And then you have actually today I was cooking for the community, and we had some wilted lettuce in the fridge, and it was so tempting to think about, oh, you know, like, let me try to use everything except the wilted lettuce. But the wilted lettuce also became part of our dish as well. So I thought, you know, if I don't want to use this old wilted lettuce and I only choose the freshest stuff, then what's going to happen to that wilted lettuce? It's come to us. It's in the fridge. You know, we everything that comes to us here is a gift of kindness of other people. Like they've offered it to us. And so I have to do the best that I can with that. And so I used that wilted lettuce, and there were no complaints. It was pretty good, and I don't think that the brothers were just being polite. I think they enjoyed the meal. So yeah, there's a tendency to think, oh, a nice fresh heirloom tomato or something, that's fancy. It's beautiful. It's delicious. And then this old wilted lettuce, or that mysterious container of mysterious green stuff in the back of your fridge, let's just you know, not use that at all. That's no good. But in fact, with this big mind, we see both of those ingredients as equally valuable, and Dogen tells us to handle them as carefully. And he's not talking about the old green thing in your fridge or the heirloom tomato, but handle the ingredients of your life, the circumstances of your life whatever they are, the superior ones, the inferior ones, as preciously, as carefully as you would handle your two eyes if you're holding them in your hands. So what's there in our physical environment, in the circumstances of our life, in our fridge, is always enough, more than enough. This also means, this broad mind also means when we look at the ingredients of our life, we don't discriminate between things. We got the space to welcome and smile to our suffering and our pain and our afflictive emotions. Our heart and our mind is broad enough to be able to include both and to welcome both on our path and to see both as equally important. We're not so elevated when we experience wonderful things, and not so devastated when we experience challenging things, and we will experience many of both. We see that both are wonderful. And the second of these three minds that Master Dogen speaks about is the parental or nurturing mind. And it's literally you can translate it as old mind, Lao Tam, Lao Xin, old mind. It takes great care with whatever and with whatever we encounter. And this is also this spirit of looking kindly upon each and every experience and each and every person. To have the mind and the heart of a parent, of caring for everybody with that mind as well. If you're a parent, or in my case, I'm not a parent, but I have a lot of younger brothers and sisters. And for me, the greatest joy that I have is, like, not so long ago, one of my younger brothers, who's quite shy, has so much wisdom and so much depth, but is so shy. Really, he's just silent most of the time because he's very introverted. And finally, he gave just a 6 or 7 minute talk. And a lot of people think that on Sundays here in Mountain Spring, Phab Hai gives a Dharma talk, and somehow people think, oh, Phab Hai wants to give Dharma talks. Phab Hai doesn't give other people a chance. Phab Hai is always begging the other monastics to give Dharma talks, but people are a little bit shy. And I was sitting in the back. I don't like to sit in the front. It could be too much for somebody if they're wanting to give a talk, and I'm sitting right in the front. So I was sitting in the back, and as my brother was giving a talk, just this short little talk, I had tears coming down my face, and it was just this absolute joy of seeing this beautiful capacity that this young one has coming forth. And for me, that's the one of the aspects of the manifestation of the parental mind. If you have a child, I imagine it's the same thing. It's this spirit of, it's not about us at all, just wanting the best for our younger brothers, our younger sisters, for those that we come into contact with, and feeling so proud when somebody's like able to transform their suffering, when something manifests like that. This is the old mind. Sometimes I also see manifestations of the old mind, when we're able to hear something, when we're able to see something, when we're able to experience a situation and to not get blown away by it, to kind of retain some element of like, oh yeah, okay, it's okay, it's going to be fine, we'll get through this. And then the third of the three minds is joyful mind. This is the mind of gratitude for what is. And with joyful mind, Dogen makes a couple of other points. First, that joy doesn't exist separately from challenges and obstacles. This is an important one. It's important not to get caught in this idea. If we had no challenges, honestly, we probably wouldn't have given rise to the determination to practice to transform our suffering. There wouldn't be any reason to. Dogen reminds us that the aim of a practitioner And similar to my experience of cooking is to hold up a single wilted ingredient and to turn it into a golden body. The wilted ingredient, or to use the example of when I was cooking lunch today, the wilted lettuce is any challenging situation, feeling, or perception we might have, to turn those circumstances into the golden body of awakening. It's not only turning the joyful things or the great big successes, it's the unglamorous, the frankly boring experiences of our life that we're invited to turn into the golden offering. That's where the real wisdom is. We turn those circumstances into the golden body of awakening. We use the ingredients of our life, of your life. Even as we can be inspired by the examples of the lives of the Buddha, the great disciples and great teachers like Thay and so on. But please, if you're a good student of the Buddha, a good student of Thay, please make sure that even if you're inspired by the ingredients of other people's lives, you use your own ingredients. Use the circumstances of your own life. And honestly, from my experience, when we give rise to this energy that we call bodhicitta, we can expect to be blessed with a lot of suffering, a lot of difficulty quite quickly. Blessed. Yes, this doesn't sound like our usual idea of blessing coming down from the sky, raining down like nectar from above. But how many times have we heard that the way out is through, or the way out is in? There's even a podcast with this name. This is an important reminder that blessings in Buddhism don't come from above, from some god or something like that, but they come about in an unexpected form. Blessings come when we're able to understand how a difficulty came to be, what internal and external causes and conditions brought it about, and through this understanding to transform that wilted piece of lettuce into a golden pagoda. If our heart is happy, it's open to challenges. We usually think of happiness as not having any challenges. And to me, this kind of happiness is pretty fragile. Now, this doesn't mean that we sometimes don't wish for an easier run of it. I certainly do. But what it means to me is, just as Tay says, we smile to it. We smile to ourselves, and we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we just keep on swimming. It's more an attitude of, oh, this again. Okay. Now, everybody knows that I'm not someone who enjoys the cold. For me, the hotter the better. Many years ago, when I came to Plum Village, I came from the beginnings of summer in Australia to the winter in France. And that winter was particularly cold for that region in France. Now, bear in mind that I came from the region of Australia that experiences two seasons, hot and wet and hot and dry. I'd never actually seen bare trees, like the trees in the winter and so on. The temperatures in Plum Village in that winter came down to about minus 12 degrees Celsius for a few days. At the time, we only had temperamental wood stoves in our rooms to heat the rooms with. I had never been so cold in my life. And at the time, Plum Village had just acquired New Hamlet. They just purchased the land that became New Hamlet. And I was sent with another brother to help build their greenhouse in the cold. One morning when we were working, I turned to him and said, "It's so cold." And he turned to me and he just said, "Difficulty welcome." When difficulty arises, awesome. we've got that going for us too. Now, this is not easy. I'll be the very first one to say this. But perhaps you would be so kind as to write that phrase down and to post it somewhere that you'll see it often. Difficulty, welcome. And to see that difficulty not as an obstacle, not as something to overcome, but to see it as something that's in your favor. That's really the mind and the heart of the Bodhisattva. That's the kind of mind and heart that I think we need at this moment in time. With that view, the cook, the practitioner, begins to touch the kind of joy that's not so conditional. That joy arises from the vow to benefit others, and it doesn't depend on whether things are going right, and it doesn't fade away when things are going wrong, quote unquote wrong. And most of the time, things are not going to go to plan, y'all. They're just not. These three minds, they also reflect and they contain each other. For example, parental mind is a natural extension of both the big mind and the joyful mind. And joyful mind is very much a nurturing mind, the mind of a parent. And together, these three minds describe the practice of someone on the Bodhisattva path. So this month, as we consider the wonderful parable in the chapter 3 of the Lotus Sutra about the Buddha vehicle, we reflect on our own capacities. We also reflect on this beautiful teaching of accepting things with joy. Then I'd like to ask everyone to reflect on what are the sources of joy and delight for you in your practice, and how do you nurture joy, ease, and delight when the going gets rough, and to consider putting into practice this teaching, which I consider to be a very beautiful and a very powerful teaching, this teaching of difficulty, welcome. I wish everybody a very wonderful and a fruitful month. I hope that you receive something from this talk this evening, and thank you so much for spending this time together. We'll conclude with the sound of the bell.